Hello everyone, it's Sun Types, and today I'm talking about one of my favorite decks in the standard format and post-rotation format, which is Arceus VSTAR. I think Arceus VSTAR is arguably the best deck post-rotation. I personally wouldn't say it's the very best, but it's quite good and it's very consistent. And today we're going to talk about some of the more unique builds. We're specifically going to be focusing on Arceus with Armor Rouge, which is both the EX and a single prizer, as well as Arceus with a Alolan Vulpix V-Star. But there are other ways to play it. First of all, you can put Arceus V-Star in Charizard. Yep, here we go. It's played a lot. Charizard's a very good deck post-rotation. Charizard EX, I should say. And Arceus V-Star is a nice little addition. Not anything that you have to play, but it's pretty good. And otherwise, you play like Force Seal Stone. And then other decks could play Arceus. Like you could put it in Chien-Pao. You probably wouldn't, but you could. A lot of decks just run Force Seal Stone. Obviously, Lugia would never play Arceus, but um, Arceus is really good in a lot of different decks, but also it's a big focus of some decks. And we'll talk about what it does if you're not familiar with that in a second. But then Arceus Giratina is very good. It's generally the best way to play it, and certainly the most common way to play it. But a lot of the Arceus Giratina decks, they do have some interesting techs as well. But that's not the focus of today's video, especially because a lot of people have talked about the deck, and I think a lot of you know it pretty well. Arceus Gudra, it's actually very similar to Arceus Giratina, and it's not as good. And then there's this Arceus Pidgeot deck, that's Arceus Giratina. Anyway, let's just hop into things, starting with Arceus Armor Rouge, and I should talk about Arceus itself. Arceus has its ability Starbirth of V-Star power, so you can only use one V-Star power per game, but Arceus is probably the best one, certainly top 5. During your turn, you may search your deck for up to 2 cards and put them into your hand. Keep in mind you do not need to reveal them, and you're not supposed to because you can't cheat by taking like the quote wrong types of cards as opposed to something like if you played in Ultra Ball, you have to get a Pokemon, so you need to show your opponent you got a Pokemon. Arceus V-Star, you can get any type of card, which is really nice, including Special Energy, which are traditionally extremely difficult to search out, and items, which are also difficult to search out, but generally not as useful as Special Energy, um, or at least as useful in individual quantities. Decks play like lots of items, so just drawing one isn't super useful. But getting special energies like double turbo energy is extremely useful. This is great with your attack Trinity Nova. You do 200 for 3 colorless. Search your deck for up to 3 basic energy. Attach them to your Pokemon V in any way you like, then shuffle your deck. This is really good, obviously, because it empowers up your other Pokemon. And most of these decks are focused on Pokemon V, kind of. But then we get to this Arm Rouge, which we'll talk about right now. But first of all, Arceus V-Star can power up the other Arceus V-Stars. And I'll actually pull up all the Arm Rouge lists. I haven't looked at all of them too much, but they are all good, except for this. Is this the right list? This one says, oh yeah, no, this is the right list. All these lists did win tournaments as well, I'll tell you that. But there are a few different builds. This one runs grass. A lot are pretty straightforward with just fire, and then this one runs, it's like toolboxy, which is pretty cool. But we'll talk about this one later because it kind of flows into the Alolan Vulpix V-Star topic as well. And not all these play Arm Rouge EX, but a bunch do, and I'll talk about Arm Rouge itself first. So first of all, Arm Rouge has its ability, the single prizer, its ability Fire Off. As often as you like during your turn, you may move a fire energy from your bench Pokemon to your active Pokemon. This is really useful. Obviously, it allows you to move energy around, hopefully wherever you want. And keep in mind, if you do run Sharon's Care or something like that, or Professor Toad's Scenario to scoop up one of your Pokemon, make sure you switch it out first or retreat. You want to be able to preserve as much energy as you can. And so you can't, if you have Arceus V-Star in the active that's damaged and you want to heal it up and return it into your hand, then you're going to lose all the energy. You can't move it to the bench first, which is a little annoying, but it is what it is. But for the most part, your idea is you accelerate energy to the bench with Arceus V-Star, and then you can move them wherever you want, including to Delphox V, which you can just accelerate directly to, but Magical Fire here. For Fire Colorless, you do 120 and put 2 energy from this Pokemon into the Lost Zone, which is a little annoying, but not that big of a deal. And this attack does 120 to your opponent's benched as well. So that's really nice. It's 240 spread across the board. It's good against Barrel. This deck does run 1-1 Barrel. A lot of lists run 1-1, 2-2, some of these, mostly 1-1s though. because you do have Arceus V-Star's ability. I guess I should talk about Arceus V-Star and why it's so good post-rotation. We'll talk about this more with the Alolan Vulpix V-Star, but Path to the Peak is rotating, meaning that Arceus V-Star's ability is always active, including late game. So you don't need to use that turn 2 Arceus V-Star like so many people do right now, because it's not like you're going to lose it. You'll lose it if your opponent, or it's not like you'll lose access to it by waiting. Your opponent could, of course, knock out Arceus, but if you have 2 in play, then they're not going to be able to shut off the ability. There are certain ways, and post the next expansion, Temporal Forces is coming out soon, which has new cards like, or it's coming out when rotation happens in around a week, which has cards like Prime Catcher, but keep in mind that this after that does have a card that it's a Pokemon that's abilities Path, but it's much weaker than Path. But that will be an option to shut down your abilities. But for now, there is no option like that. So Arceus V-Star will have an ability, unless there's some like super weird scenarios. Aside from that, we need to talk about Armrouge EX. Armrouge EX again has an ability on Pokemon that would be turned off by Path, but now that can't happen. So if this Pokemon is full HP and takes 80, it takes 80 damage less from your opponent's attacks. So that's a lot. That essentially puts you up to 340 HP, which is not absurdly good, but it's good. It's very good. And of course, the major benefit here is that you're now a very tanky Pokemon, the most tanky Pokemon in the deck. And so now that you're very tanky, you can attack here as well. Scorching Bazooka for 2 colorless, but really you don't want to be using it for 2 colorless. It does 40 and 40 more for each fire energy attached to this Pokemon. The idea, if you like attack with Arceus, with 1 fire energy in play on Arceus, and then 3 in play somewhere else, you could just put 4 on here, be hitting 200, attach another one, be hitting, with 5 energy, you're hitting, um, yeah, 240. I was like doing the math in my head and I got confused. But yeah, so you can hit 240, 280, you can hit these really good damage numbers. You also have Magma Basin to accelerate energies. This is really good with the single Prizer Armrouge, or the baby Armrouge as some people call it. For those of you who don't know, if someone calls something a baby Pokemon, there are actually baby Pokemon, but they're generally referring to a single prize version of a Pokemon that has a multi-prizer. So baby Armrouge with Armrouge EX. Um, yeah, I don't know if we're going to talk about any other baby Pokemon, baby Toedscool, I guess you could say. There's a Toedscool EX and things like that. But anyway, the baby Armrouge here is really good with Magma Basin, which accelerates energy to your bench. You can then move to your active, which is your attacker. And it's not that hard to get energy in the discard. You do have 4 copies of Ultra Ball, which works with the barrel, and Mew EX. Mew EX is also an attacking option. It's a pivot. It's a very nice card in this deck because it has great synergy with the single prize Armrouge. It has great synergy because for your treat, and also because it can be an attacker. And it has that like draw ability, which is really nice. And as I said, Path will not be turning that off. Same thing with Radiant Charizard, which you can attack as early as turn. Can you attack turn 2 with this? One, I think you technically can. It's very hard, but you can attack certainly turn 3 with this because you can move a bunch of energy to it and you do more. You don't do more, but you can attack for cheaper if your opponent's taking prizes and you hit a very decent amount of damage. Radiant Charger is a really good attacker if you can fit it in and you don't need another Radiant, which this deck doesn't need. Aside from that, we do see your normal trainer stuff. We see high counts of Iono and Judge because if you go down to a smaller hand, you can draw out of that with Barrel or Mew EX, hopefully. I personally would like a 2-2 Barrel, but you can certainly get by with the 1-1. It looks like most people are going that route. It is a bit more risky, but it is also, it does free up deck space for other options, including an ace spec. I mean, you want an ace spec every time, but like this is Prime Catcher, which is you switch one of your opponent's Pokemon into the active, and then switch one of your Pokemon into the active, and it's an item card, so that's really good. You have Choice Belt, very good in Arceus, and Lost Vacuum, and Lost City, and 2 Magma Mucin. Keep in mind, you don't need to play as high counts of Stadium Bumps if you don't want to. These are played because they're good cards in their own right, not just because they're Stadium Bumps, because there's no more path, but they are still good cards. And yeah, that's pretty much all there is to say about this deck, but it's a really sick deck. This list now runs a new card, Buddy Buddy Poffin. This card is very good. I'm looking at, yeah, okay. So it searches for up to 2 basic Pokemon. I don't know why Limitless translation is wrong. This card is Is this revealed in English? We've had pre-releases, so we do know what the cards are in English, but Friendship pop in here, search the deck for up to 2 basic Pokemon with 70 HP or less and put them onto your bench and shuffle your deck. And when I say the translation's wrong, the name is translated wrong of the card, but the effect is right. This is good. It's kind of like Battle VIP Pass. Not really in this deck. It doesn't get your Arceus, most importantly, but it does get your Bidoof and Charcadet, and those are really important. So there are 2 copies slotted in here. And then we do see higher counts of research as well, and a few different changes. We do see counter catch. We do see maximum belt, which does it's a tool when attached to a Pokemon. It does 50 more damage to your opponent's active EX. Yeah, just EX or just active as well. This is useful in a bunch of scenarios. I mean, 50 more damage is a very decent amount of damage. Arceus VSTAR, as well as potentially Rouge EX and some of the other attackers, don't have super high damage outputs that can get up to the numbers that you're looking for, which can change because you do have a lot of different damage numbers you can hit, but this card's really nice and somewhat common in Arceus, as well as Prime Catcher, which is just really good. Next up, this list is pretty similar. We do see the 2-2, but Barrel, no, oh no, maybe it doesn't have any Pokemon cut. Pretty straightforward. I do like the 2-2, but Barrel going with a bit more consistency there. Also, we do see Capturing Aroma in some of these decks here, which is it's an item card that searches for Pokemon. On a coin flip, it gets either an evolution or a basic, which is nice, especially because you're essentially you're never sad to get either. There are obviously cases where you want one more than the other, but hitting like an evolution, it's pretty much always good because you have a barrel and you have Rouge, all the Rouges, and then you have Arceus, and getting those in play. The only one you wouldn't want to evolve would be potentially Rouge because you have the split of them, so you don't want the wrong one in play. But Barrel is obviously better than Bidoof, and Arceus V-Star is better than Arceus V. One thing I do want to say, I guess, is that Delphox V can snipe the Barrel. It cannot snipe Bidoof. So if your opponent is playing if it's Delphox V versus Barrel or Bidoof, you can just play your Bidoof, and that's not going to be able to be sniped by Delphox V due to its ability, which is a thing. But Barrel is within range, which is good for Delphox V, but not if you have double turbo on. So keep that in mind. And yeah, but excuse me, allergies. But yeah, pretty straightforward stuff there compared to the other lists. Now moving on to this list, which runs grass. It only runs 2 grass. I would play 3. I would definitely play 3 grass in this list. I'd probably cut a double turbo for a grass, although I get why you wouldn't want to do that. But we do have Iron Leaves EX. This is really good in Arceus Giratina. Pretty much any Giratina V-Star deck and most Arceus decks as well, because its ability Rapid Veneer. When you play this down from your hand onto your bench, you can move it into the active and move a bunch of energy to it. Notably, you can move not fire energy because you can move fire energy to it anyway with Rouge. You don't even play the EX here either because you play less fires. Um, so yeah, definitely drop a fire for a grass. But because if you prize one or for whatever reason can't get into play, you can't use Iron Leaves here. But they do run 4 Magma Basin. There are a few weird things going on. The other list ran 2 to 3 Magma Basin and they ran more fires. This deck does not run as many fire energies, obviously, and only 7. And it does run for Magma Basin, which to me is a little sketchy. But anyway, you do have the really powerful Iron Leaves EX, and then you do run this Toad School, which says cards in your opponent's discard pile can't be put into their hand by an effect of abilities or trainer cards. This, what was it? It stops Pokestop, which is good. It stops Superior Energy Retrieval, which is good. It would stop Clara, but that's rotating. But getting Pseudo reprinted in next expansion or some point in the future that got revealed. I'll talk about that at some point. Or maybe I already talked about it. I don't know my upload schedule. And then, yeah, pretty straightforward stuff. Aside from that, though, and we do see the Iron Leaves obviously is taking up some deck space and reducing consistency. So it's up to you whether or not you want to play it, but it's really good against, or it's pretty good against Charizard EX, allowing you to one-shot that. But then they will one-shot you back, so keep that in mind. Next up, we have an Rouge deck with Luminous Energy, and it does play a Water Energy as well. This allows you to attack with 2 new attackers. First of all, we have Radiant Heatran. Radiant Heatran is really interesting. It kind of replaces Rouge EX, I'd say, but they're very different as well. We also see Gouging Fire. I'll talk about Gouging Fire first. For Fire Carlos, you hit 260 but can't attack until you leave the active, which isn't a huge deal, but a bit of a pain in certain scenarios. But the main thing here is it obviously hits big damage. With Maximum Belt, you are going to be hitting 310 damage, which is good. It's not enough to one-shot Charizard, but it's still pretty good. But then we do have Radiant Heatran, which can hit infinite damage. Well, not, it can hit a lot of damage. It does 70 for each damage counter on this Pokemon, so each time you accelerate to it with Mega Basin, and this list does run 4, although only 6 energies, that seems like not a lot. 6 fires, because you do want to be Mega Basining a lot, but it's certainly doable. But then, each time you Magma Basin to Radiant Heatran, you essentially do 140 more damage. You're building damage up on yourself, so you can be like sniped or something, but that's not super common. And you can always just stop Magma Basoning to it and Magma Basin to Arm Rouge, and then, Radiant Heatran, it's very good, right? So if you get a lot of energy, or a lot of damage on it from energy, which then you move to other Pokemon, then you're hitting really big amounts of damage. After 3, you're hitting 420, which essentially one-shots everything, not technically everything, but pretty much everything. And yeah, so that's pretty powerful. It's kind of like obviously Radiant Charizard. It is the Radiant of choice in this deck. I don't know which is better. Radiant Heatran is more committal. Radiant Charizard is the exact opposite. In which case, if things are in kind of a weird position where you don't have great options, you can just chuck down Radiant Charizard and attack with it. Versus Radiant Heatran, which is very setup dependent but has a higher payoff. We also see Iron Hands EX with Ampu very much, because this list does run Luminous Energy as well as a Water for Alolan Vulpix V-Star, but Luminous because of Arceus. Anyway, Luminous Energy here though is any type of energy as long as you only have one special energy attached to it. So don't attach. So what this allows you to do, you can move it around with Arm Rouge, but if you ever put Luminous Energy with a special energy on the same Pokemon, now you can't move Luminous Energy and around anymore with Arm Rouge because it is um, because it does not provide fire energy anymore. So that's a weird. Don't do that. That will be bad for you, like very bad for you because you can't move it around. Aside from that, Alolan Vulpix V-Star is also insane. We'll talk about this in just a minute. But Snow Mirage, if it isn't affected by effects to your opponent's Pokemon, so you can hit through stuff. And then it gives you for 160 for Water Colorless, you get an immunity to your opponent's Pokemon with abilities or damage from this Pokemon. This is incredibly powerful against obviously a large number of Pokemon. Arceus V-Star, for example, has an ability, and there is no Path to the Peak. That helps this card a lot because Path to the Peak removes abilities from Pokemon, meaning that they can actually hit through you. But with Path gone, they cannot do that anymore, which is really huge. You do also have your V-Star Power Silvery Snow Star, which is 70 for free for each of your opponent's Pokemon to be in play. It doesn't hit weakness. This isn't very good. It's okay against Mew VMAX, but that is rotating. But the first attack's obviously really good and can auto-win. And now we're going to pivot more towards that, which we have a bunch of lists. Apparently this one's been played a bunch. It has won a tournament, but has been played a bunch as well. Maybe it won a tournament and people just copied it. I don't know. Oh, I guess it does say the person who played it. So was it the same person? No. Was it the same person? No, it looks like no one played it twice. But that doesn't really matter for this, because the deck did well, and we're going to talk about it. And there are some really interesting things as well to talk about with this. And this is more of a traditional Arceus list. This one does run Gudra, though. We'll talk about this one first. And you have a Zoo and Gudra V-Star, which walls for Water Metal Colorless. You do 200, take 80 less next turn. You do have a Healing V-Star power as well. But then we see some really interesting things going on with the deck. We see Leafy Camo Poncho stopping you from being gusted up. This is interesting. It's a defensive tool as well as Giant Cape, which gives you 100 more HP. These are two defensive tools, but if your opponent plays Lost Vacuum, they can really stop the effects of those tools altogether because they can Lost Vacuum them before they get any effect. That does not mean these tools are bad by any means. Even if people do play a lot of Lost Vacuum, forcing them to use those Lost Vacuum can hurt them. It does force them to lost zone cards, which can definitely be bad. But on top of that, of course, it does just force them to do certain things, which means that they're either digging for it and burning resources, or they have to like forego some other plan or something like that. But anyways, they have decent value here. We also see TM Devolution, kind of an interesting little tech. good against Chimpow, good against um it does go Charizard. It's certainly good against Charizard as well, and it's good in a few different matchups. But aside from that, we have Professor Terra's Scenario and Sharon's Care for healing. We have Iono and Judge for disruption, and then we have two disruptive stadiums. Or Lake Acuity is a tanky stadium. Your Pokemon with water or fighting take 20 less from attacks. Not gonna lie, I thought it was 30 less. It's 20 less. Um, so this is interesting. Does it have to be basic? I don't think it does. No. Keep in mind this can help your opponent, but then Alolan Vulpix V-Star will hit through that, and so that's an interesting thing. And we see Pokemon League HQ, and this is really interesting because it says attacks used by basic Pokemon in play cost one colorless more, which is obviously a very disruptive stadium to certain decks. It's not super powerful though. Basics aren't super prevalent, but also they are a bit problematic. If your opponent is playing, I mean, there are a number of ancient decks that are basic decks. There's Roaring Moon, Baby Roaring Moon, I guess I should say. Roaring Moon EX, Great Tusk as well, Baby Great Tusk. And then there's also the Future Box deck, and those are all basic focus. There is also Miraidon. That is not the best deck. It's not terrible, but nowhere near as good as it isn't right now, which isn't even that good. But I'd say it falls down a tier with rotation. But we do see disruption elements, and then we see, Barbarrel, Alolan Vulpix V-Star, Arceus V-Star as well. Oh, I put this. Wait, is this a. What deck is this? This is apparently a Alolan Vulpix. I don't know. This looks very similar to the other list we looked at before. We obviously see. Wait, is this the same? This looks. It is the same. I'm just blind. Okay, I was like, that looks like the list we just looked at, which does run Alolan Vulpix V-Star. But yeah. This list is a little bit different as well. We see a lot of similar aspects. We do see Lost City, Prime Catcher. Oh, I didn't talk about Mist Energy either. Mist Energy is insanely good as a special energy, preventing all effects of attacks done to the Pokemon this card is attached to. I mentioned Baby Roaring Moon, and then there also is Giratina V-Star. But then there are a lot of other Pokemon that have effects of attacks, such as damage counters being placed with Sableye. This just stops that all completely, and it's very difficult, not impossible by any means, especially with next expansion or some future expansion reprinting enhanced hammer, but for now, right at when rotation hits, Mist Energy will be pretty good, and giving you invulnerability to those like one-shotting Pokemon, which obviously if you want to be tanky, getting one-shotted is not what you want. And so this list runs that same type of thing. We do see Medical Energy, which heals 30 when attached as well, which is pretty interesting. I'm not sure how I feel about that, but an interesting addition nonetheless. We also see V-Guard for some tankiness. And then Radiant Greninja as well for a draw engine. You can attack with it, but I think it's pretty awkward. No Poppy on this list. And then we do see Area as well. This is another disruption card. Look at your opponent's hand. Discard up to 2 item cards you find there. This can be really difficult to deal with. You can kind of try to trap your opponent and use Area to stop them from switching. But of course, you can also just use it to disrupt your opponent and slow them down in the early game. It's a card I have not messed around with too much at all, but obviously it will disrupt your opponent's Pokemon or their like board, their hand, I should say. And then once their hand's disrupted, that's not too good for them, right? Because now they are potentially not really able to do very much. It's kind of like a card like Grabber, but it is a bit more powerful, I'd say. Certainly, it won't necessarily be super high value all the time, but still pretty interesting. Then we see Professor Terra's Scenario as well for healing and Sharon's Care again. This next list, more airy. We do see the Vengeful Punch, which does damage when you hit into, and then we see Aerodactyl V-Star. This card is really interesting. Lost Eye for fighting colorless. You do 240, and then you put you lost on the top 3 guys of your deck, which is not ideal. But we do see a lot of cards played in multiple copies. Airy and Professor Terra Scenario, which are tech cards, are both played in multiple copies, which is pretty interesting. Defiance Band and Vengeful Punch, which both add damage, are not, but they do cover similar roles. And hopefully you don't lost on Radiant Greninja, or like, you don't really want to lost on things that you don't want to lost on, I guess I should say. But yeah, and then you have this really interesting V-Star power, which is an attack that is like also an ability. Until this Pokemon leaves play, it gains an ability that has the effect your opponent's Pokemon V in play, except any Aerodactyl V-Star, has no abilities. That is really crazy. Because, I mean, this means that it's like Path. It's not as good as Path. It does not shut down Radiant Pokemon. It does not shut down your own Pokemon, but it does. It also doesn't shut down Pokemon EX like Miraidon or Gardevoir, which is more important, or Chimpow EX, or things like that. But it does shut down your opponent's Arceus V-Stars. Keep in mind this will shut down their abilities, meaning that they can hit through a Alolan Vulpix V-Star, so you want to be very careful about that. But still really interesting. And then keep in mind when Aerodactyl V-Star dies, unsurprisingly, it will lose its ability because it's not in play. But it's really interesting and potentially very, very annoying to certain decks, especially if you're able to get it set up before they are. And it's just not super fun to have to deal with. But it does take a little bit of setup if you want to get that going. The main thing here is the 240 for 3, which is very efficient, just hitting a little more than some of the other options. Lastly, we have two more lists. Pretty straightforward list. This one does run Iron Bundle, which is really interesting. Um, First of all, it does have an energy switch, which it can use to attack with Raidouku Ninja, kinda sorta, or Iron Bundle. But Iron Bundle's ability, Hyper Blur, once during your turn, if this Pokemon is on your bench, you may discard it and switch out your opponent's active to the bench. This is really difficult to have to deal with certain times because it's like rope, right? And rope can be really annoying in certain times. A lot of times it just uses a switch, but it can be a massive disruption tool as well, which is potentially really powerful. Aside from that, it's um, pretty mediocre, but it can be, yes, it can be really insane. Aside from that, that's all there is to say about these decks. Really cool stuff going on here. I guess I'll take a look at the Juju decks as well, real quick. I don't think there's too much going on. We do see a Squova popping in, and the Disruption cards, we do see Ditto as well. Fun little goofy guy here. But yeah, pretty straightforward. You just see a lot of Vulpix popping in here. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, consider subscribing, liking, commenting, all that good stuff. I'm getting close to 1,000 subs. I'm really excited. And I got some really big plans for that. I got a big video planned for that. It's not quite ready, but it will be ready very soon. But I hope you enjoyed. And as always, I'm excited to see you in the next video.